In 1972, a group of researchers conducted an experiment that shattered our understanding about human consciousness and the physical world. What started out as a simple psychological study quickly spiraled into something far more unsettling. Volunteers gathered in a dimly lit room, surrounded by nothing but their own thoughts and a shared belief. They were about to summon something, but what they called forth, what they truly connected with, wasn't entirely human. This was the beginning of what would forever become known as the Philip experiment.
The hauntings seem to be real, but I have no faith in the departed spirits.
The child simply says, if I want to do it, it can be done.
We've been interested in these physical phenomena for so many years, and I feel that at last we've made a breakthrough.
In the early 1960s, Dr. A.R.G. Owen, a curious but skeptical mathematician and parapsychologist, moved from Cambridge, England to Toronto, Canada, driven by his fascination of phenomena that science couldn't easily explain. He became involved with the Toronto Society for Psychical Research to answer a question burning within him. Could the human mind be responsible for the very paranormal events that people so confidently reported? A decade later, he devised an experiment. He formed a team of 8 seemingly random people without any special psychic abilities. The team consisted of a Mensa chairperson, an industrial designer and his wife, a heating engineer, an accountant, a bookkeeper, and a sociology student. Notably alongside them, overlooking the experiment, was psychologist Dr. Joel Witten. The team decided to immerse themselves in the story of a man named Philip Aylesford, a 17th century English nobleman who fell in love with a gypsy woman named Margot. His forbidden love led to Margot's execution for witchcraft, and Philip, devastated by her death, ended his life by suicide at the age of 29. The goal was to summon and interact with Philip's ghost or spirit. The only problem was that Philip was never a real person. Philip's entire life story had been intricately designed by the team in an attempt to interact with a completely fictional character by nothing but their own collective imagination. After memorizing every aspect of Philip's supposed life down to his personality, the group began meeting in September of 1972, speaking of Philip as if he were a real person. Initially, nothing happened, and doubts quickly grew. Weeks turned to months with no signs of Philip's potential presence, but Dr. Owen encouraged persistence, believing they were on the brink of something significant. After an entire year of having no luck with the meetings, the group switched their approach. They dimmed the lights, added antique objects, and aimed to create an atmosphere reminiscent of traditional seances, hoping deeper immersion would yield better results. And immediately, the mood shifted. The group sat around a sturdy table, hands placed lightly on its surface, inviting Philip to join them. Within just a few meetings, the table slightly trembled, marking the first official interaction with Philip. Skeptical, the members looked around at one another, assuming that they had caused the subtle movement, but shortly after, it happened again. More distinct this time. Dr. Owen leaned in.
Hello, Philip. It's Al.
A single clear knock echoed from the table. 1 for yes, 2 for no. That was the system they had agreed upon. Questions flowed rapidly, each answered by knocks or shifts in the table's position. Philip's responses seemed to align with his backstory, but when they asked for anything beyond what they had created, silence followed. Word of their success began to spread, raising profound questions from researchers and skeptics alike. Were they truly communicating with an entity, or was this a manifestation of their subconscious minds? Dr. Owen and Dr. Witten pondered the implications. Skeptics highlighted the possibility of unconscious movements, a psychological phenomenon known as the idiometer effect. This phenomenon often occurs when using a Ouija board, a wooden board with letters and numbers. Participants place their fingers on a small pointer or planchette and ask questions to a supposed spirit as the pointer moves to spell out answers. Research has shown that these movements are entirely involuntary, caused solely by the idiometer effect, with no evidence hinting at paranormal activity. There's a possibility that this is the case for the interactions of Philip as well, but even if this were the case, the consistency and intensity of the occurrences were hard to dismiss entirely. On the other hand, these phenomena could likely point towards the idea of psychokinesis, a theory that suggests that the mind has the ability to influence physical objects without physical interaction. Numerous studies have explored whether our thoughts can influence the physical world in unconventional ways. Some results suggest that this influence might actually exist, even if the mechanisms are not fully understood. Without hard evidence, however, this topic remains highly controversial and deeply open to skepticism. But that doesn't mean that people aren't searching for some. Around the same time as Dr. Owen's interactions with Philip, researchers at Princeton University conducted what would become a decades-long experiment under the PEAR, or Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. By observing participants trying to influence machines that produce entirely random sequences of numbers known as REGs, or random event generators, researchers at PEAR recorded very subtle but statistically significant deviations from pure chance. Across millions of trials, the researchers noticed that human intention seemed to shift the results by fractions of a percent, with effect sizes ranging from 0.1 to 1%. This may seem small, but they repeated this experiment over millions of trials, so even the tiniest effect can indicate a pretty big pattern that suggests a genuine phenomenon. And after years of data, a pretty big pattern soon emerged. Stick with me as I try and explain the statistical significance of this, but I'll try and do my best so everyone can understand. The sum of the deviation from random expectations grew very steadily, creating a distribution that was nearly impossible to chalk up to pure chance. The lab reported that over its entire dataset, the observed effects reached a significance level of a p-value of less than 0.05, which pretty much just means that there was a 5% likelihood that these deviations could be due to random fluctuation alone. This is around the threshold that is commonly accepted in scientific research to indicate that there are real effects at play, and it's not just a lucky coincidence. Of course, not everyone saw these findings as proof of mind over matter, though. James Alcock, a psychologist critical of parapsychology, pointed out that PEAR's protocols left room for unconscious cues or experimental biases that might account for the results. He stressed the need for even stricter controls, arguing that subtle experimental flaws could easily skew the data in favor of an effect that wasn't actually there. Likewise, physicist Milton Rothman argued that the concept of psychokinesis was fundamentally incompatible with the established physical laws that we know today, casting doubt on the legitimacy of PEAR's results. Following PEAR's closure in 2007, the Global Consciousness Project, aka the GCP, took these ideas even further, setting up REGs across the globe, tracking changes in worldwide consciousness. These devices recorded data continuously, and researchers noticed anomalies during major global events, such as natural disasters, large-scale cultural moments, and even times of collective grief or celebration. For example, during the 9/11 terrorist attacks in 2001, the GCP's random number generators exhibited astronomical deviations, with the cumulative z-score of 4.5. This corresponds to a probability of about 1 in 161,000 under the null hypothesis, meaning there was a 0.00062% chance that those effects were due to just random chance. This is the closest thing we have to hard evidence suggestive of psychokinesis, even if we still have no idea of how it might actually work. Apart from anecdotal reports and statistical anomalies, the only other hint we have about psychokinesis lies in exploring one of the most intricate and enigmatic frontiers of science ever studied, the realm of quantum mechanics. Quantum physics, governing the behavior of particles at the smallest possible scales, introduces concepts like the observer effect and wave function collapse, where observation changes outcomes. The famous double slit experiment, where particles change behavior when observed, hints at complex mechanisms in the quantum world that remain largely unexplained. In the context of psychokinesis, some propose that if consciousness can collapse a quantum state, it may also exert influence on larger systems, in a subtle way, but in some way nonetheless. Adding to this mystery is the concept of entanglement. Quantum entanglement refers to the way particles can become interconnected, so that the state of one instantly influences the state of another, regardless of the distance between them. This has led to speculation that there might be an unknown mechanism through which mental intention could have a non-local or distant effect on physical systems, similar to the effects we see in quantum entanglement. While these connections between psychokinesis and quantum mechanics remain highly speculative, they have still inspired considerable interest and further research. Scientists like Henry Stapp, a physicist known for his work in quantum theory and consciousness, argue that quantum mechanics cannot be fully understood without considering the role of the observer. Stapp's theory suggests that consciousness might play a fundamental role in quantum processes, possibly offering a bridge to understanding phenomena like psychokinesis. The challenge, of course, lies in the lack of empirical evidence that clearly links quantum mechanics to psychokinesis in a replicable and controlled way. Quantum effects are notoriously difficult to observe and even harder to measure outside of a tightly controlled laboratory environment. I mean, the whole premise of quantum mechanics is that observing certain phenomena can fundamentally alter their outcomes, making it nearly impossible to record or observe both states simultaneously, since you literally have to observe it to find out what happened. Also, extending quantum behavior to the macroscopic world where we observe psychokinetic claims involves some pretty wild theoretical leaps. For example, there's a speculation that quantum tunneling could somehow play a role in psychokinesis, allowing particles to bypass energy barriers through mental influence. This would imply that humans can affect probabilities on a subatomic level, essentially enabling particles to appear where they shouldn't, which is far beyond anything modern science can currently account for. Despite the speculative nature, though, the quantum perspective has fostered many interdisciplinary approaches, keeping the conversation about consciousness and its potential effects wide open. In essence, while the link between psychokinesis and quantum mechanics is far from proven, it remains one of the most intellectually stimulating areas of exploration. While PAIR, GCP, and other similar research have been met with skepticism, they also undeniably advance the conversation about human consciousness and physical reality. Whether through the subtle deviations observed in REGs or the speculative ties to quantum mechanics, the body of research presents a compelling, albeit controversial case for the hidden potential of human consciousness. Despite criticisms, though, these explorations challenge the boundaries between what we know scientifically and what remains unexplained, suggesting that the mind might play a much larger role in shaping reality than we currently or may ever understand.